Statement. Statement. John Healey.
With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on defence programmes developments. I've been Secretary of State now for 4 months. It is an honour and a privilege to have this job. Every day I meet staff from the military, civil service and industry who are totally inspiring and dedicated to keeping this country safe. Often unseen, often unheard by us and by the public, and we're proud of their professionalism. We thank them for everything that they do. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a new government getting on with delivering for defence. We've stepped up support for Ukraine, we've signed the landmark Trinity House Agreement with Germany, we've given forces personnel the largest pay rise for over 20 years, we've confirmed defence as a priority sector as part of the government's industrial strategy, and this week we secured the second reading of the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill to improve service life. Madam Deputy Speaker, Labour is the party of defence, and we will make Britain better defended. But Madam Deputy Speaker, we know these are serious times. War in Europe, conflict in the Middle East, increasing global threats. And technology is rapidly changing the nature of warfare, as we see right now in Ukraine. Before the election, we knew there were serious problems with defence. One previous Conservative Defence Secretary told this House that our armed forces have been hollowed out and underfunded over the last 14 years. However, as I have told the House since taking office, the problems were even worse than we thought. It was a dire inheritance, the state of the finances and the state of the forces, often hidden to Parliament, billion-pound black holes in defence plans, taxpayers' funds being wasted, military morale down to record lows. And that's why we're taking swift action now to inject investment, get a grip of MOD budgets and kickstart much-needed reforms to start fixing the foundations for the UK defence. And I want to update the House on what we're doing today. First, on investment. In July, the Chancellor exposed the 22 billion black hole at the heart of the government plans. Hundreds of unfunded pressures this year and into the future too. The first duty of the government is to keep this country safe, and that's why the Chancellor has announced in the budget that defence will receive a boost next year of nearly £3 billion to start to fix the foundations for our forces. And the Chancellor also told this House we will set a clear path to 2.5% of GDP on defence, which will be fully funded, unlike the Conservatives' unfunded pre-election gimmick, which was never built into government finances. But this is not just about how much you spend on defence, it's how you spend that counts, which is why we're conducting a strategic defence review at pace to assess the threats we face and the capabilities that we will need in the future. And it's also why I've introduced tight financial controls on the department, including a £300 million reduction in planned consultancy spending. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're getting a grip of MOD budgets and investing in people and in future technologies. Second, on kit and capabilities. For too long, our soldiers, sailors, aviators have been stuck with old, outdated equipment because ministers wouldn't make the difficult decommissioning decisions. As technology advances at pace, we must move faster towards the future. So today, with full backing from our service chiefs, I can confirm that 6 outdated military capabilities will be taken out of service. These decisions are set to save the MOD £150 million over the next 2 years and up to £500 million over 5 years. Savings that will be retained in full in defence. And alongside this statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've laid a WMS to outline the detail of my decommissioning decisions. These include HMS Northumberland, a frigate with structural damage that makes her simply uneconomical to repair. 46 Watchkeeper Mark Is, a 14-year-old Army drone which technology has overtaken. HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, landing ships both effectively retired by previous ministers but superficially kept on the books at a cost of £9 million a year. 14 Chinooks, some over 35 years old, accelerated out of service. 2 Wave-class tankers, neither of which has been to sea for years. And 17 Puma helicopters, some with over 50 years flying, will not be extended. And I recognise that these will mean a lot to many who've sailed and flown in them during their deployments around the world. They have provided a valuable capability over the years, but their work is done. We must look now to the future. And all current personnel will be redeployed or retrained. No one will be made redundant. As the First Sea Lord says about these retirements, and I quote, "The threat is changing, so we must have the self-confidence to make the changes required." And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, be in no doubt the future for our Royal Marines and their elite force will be reinforced in the SDR. These are common sense decisions which previous governments failed to take. Decisions that will secure better value for money for the taxpayer and better outcomes for the military. Decisions which are all backed by the chiefs and taken in consultation with SDR reviewers. Allies have been informed and we have constant dialogue with NATO. These will not be the last difficult decisions I will have to make to fix the defence inheritance that we were left with. But they will help it get a grip of finances now, and they will give greater scope to renew our forces for the future as we look towards the Strategic Defence Review and to 2.5%. And I want to thank the Chiefs for their determination to work together with me on this. Third, Madam Deputy Speaker, on reform. I have to say defence reform has been of little interest to recent defence secretaries. It doesn't make headlines, it doesn't advance careers, but how defence works must change to deal with the increasing and diversifying threats. So recently, I launched the biggest reform programme in defence for 50 years, to create a stronger UK Defence Centre, to secure better value for money, better outcomes for our armed forces, and be better able to implement the Strategic Defence Review. Central to a reformed defence is our new fully fledged National Armaments Director, which recruitment is underway now. The Chief of Defence Staff will oversee a new military strategic headquarters operating from the end of 2024, where he will formally command the individual service chiefs for the first time and will be central to prioritising investment spending between the services. And the Permanent Secretary will lead a leaner department with more policy muscle and influence. These reforms will ensure faster delivery, better integration and clearer accountability across defence to make our forces fit to fight for the future. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, our people. This government's putting defence people at the heart of our defence plans. We inherited a Conservative crisis in military recruitment and retention. Targets missed every year for 14 years, morale at record lows. We can't fix these deep-set problems overnight, but as ministers, we're on a mission to lift military morale. We've awarded the forces the largest pay increase for over 20 years, and I can announce today that I'm introducing from April a new £30,000 retention payment for a cohort of tri-service aircraft engineers who sign up for additional 3 years of service. This will affect and be open to around 5,000 personnel in total. And from January, a new £8,000 retention payment for Army personnel who've served 4 years, supporting 4,000 personnel each year for 3 years, so 12,000 troops in total. Madam Deputy Speaker, today I've set out where we were and where we are going. We're in a new era of rising global tensions. We need a new era for UK defence. And to achieve this, the government's investing £3 billion extra next year and setting a clear path to 2.5%. Driving far-reaching reform, fixing the foundations for our armed forces, to make Britain better defended, strong at home, secure abroad.
Shudder, Defence Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, we've heard it all today. The Secretary of State claiming that Labour are the party of defence. Barely an hour and a half ago, Prime Minister's questions was taken by a Deputy Prime Minister who, along with the Foreign Secretary, voted against the renewal of Trident. Now, he talks about inheriting a financial black hole. Let's just remind the House. In 2010, when we last took office, the deficit was 10.3% of GDP. We were on the verge of bankruptcy. When they took office in July, the deficit was 4.4% of GDP. Had the deficit they inherited been the same as 2010, how much bigger would it have been? £160 billion bigger, the same as the NHS budget in England last year. So we take no lectures on black holes. The fact is, they've refused to set a pathway. They have refused to set a pathway to 2.5%, and now we see the consequences: cuts instead of a pathway to 2.5%. He says his path to 2.5% will be fully funded, whilst describing our plan to 2.5% as a gimmick. Madam Speaker, our plan was funded. It was funded by reducing the size of the civil service. That's not a gimmick. It's just something their union paymasters won't allow them to do. He says defence reform was of little interest to recent defence secretaries. Well, if he's talking about Ben Wallace, this is the Defence Secretary who took the massive decision to provide battlefield weapons to Ukraine before Russia invaded it, and to provide Storm Shadow and Challenger 2. If he's talking about Grant Shapps, he gave me his 100% backing in delivering the integrated procurement model, a fundamental reform of defence procurement, all about modernisation, such as accelerating our procurement of anti-drone lasers. After we delivered a 9.7% pay rise for the most junior personnel in 2023, we welcome the retention payments. But given the cuts relating to the Royal Navy and their staffing pressures, will retention payments include non-aircraft engineers? And will the RAF and Navy also be receiving the £8,000 four-year retention bonuses, and if not, why not? On Bulwark and Albion, he says we superficially kept them on the books. Yes, we placed them in extended readiness, but I want to be clear about this. I personally sought and received assurances from the Navy's leadership as follows: that in the event of a full-scale war-fighting scenario where the priority for the Navy was literal capability, those ships could still have been regenerated to a condition able to fight, and the crews found. That's what they confirmed. Permanently scrapping the landing ships means we remove that capability entirely. So what impact will this have on the operational effectiveness of the Royal Marines? MRSS is intended to fill the gap, but will be at least 8 to 9 years away. Is he still committed to MRSS? And if so, how many will he procure? On Rotary, what will be the operational impact in the immediate term following the Puma and Chinook decisions? And what will be the cost of the commercial solution he will use to fill the capability gap in Brunei and in Cyprus? In terms of our record on Rotary, he knows that we secured £320 million of savings by renegotiating the Chinook ER procurement, and that I personally commenced the new medium helicopter competition. So specifically on new medium helicopter, I insisted, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the procurement required strong scoring for maintaining skilled rotary work in the UK and for exportability to sustain that work. Can he confirm he will not be changing the existing competition, and that he is still committed to procuring new medium helicopter without delay or deferment? Will NMH come into service before those Pumas are retired? To be clear, on Watchkeeper, as the Minister who launched the MOD's first ever drone strategy, I very much appreciate that this is an area where we need to ensure we move fast and have capabilities able to deliver in the modern battle space. On Ukraine, will he be gifting any of these capabilities to Ukraine, such as the older Chinooks or the Pumas, especially given what happened yesterday? Finally, and most importantly, what on earth does all this mean for the Strategic Defence Review? From MRSS to future drones for the British Armed Forces, he will no doubt say, wait on the SDR. So why didn't he wait on the SDR before making today's decisions? To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, whatever the Chancellor's true grasp of economics, she's certainly been able to force her priorities onto the country, getting the MOD to scrap major capabilities before they've undertaken the department's much vaunted Strategic Defence Review. They've killed off North Sea oil, undermining our energy security. This week, they're killing off the family farm and threatening our food security. Today, they're scrapping key defence capabilities and weakening our national security. Labour have made their choices. They own the consequences.
Well done.
Madam Deputy Speaker, that was a rather wide-ranging response that ranged from the fiscal position in 2010 to farming today. Let me just say to him and remind him, the last time this country spent 2.5% on defence was in 2010 with Labour. And the Tory plan to spend 2.5% on defence was a pre-election gimmick announced 4 weeks before the election was called and never hardwired into any government finances. That's why it was unfunded. That was why it was a pre-election gimmick. That's why the Institute of Fiscal Studies called it misleading. Madam Deputy Speaker, I readily pay tribute to Ben Wallace as one of my predecessors. The Honourable Gentleman talked about not defence reform, but the defence decisions that Ben Wallace made, quite rightly, to step up with military aid to Ukraine, to lead the field and to make sure that other countries followed suit. We were proud to support that in opposition. We're proud to continue that UK leadership and to help command the continued UK united support for Ukraine now. I welcome his welcome for the incentive retention payments for the aircraft engineers. They are for aircraft engineers. And I welcome his welcome for the retention payments for the army ranks. They are for privates and lance corporals, and they stand, as I've announced, and will start from January. I also welcome his welcome for the decision I've taken on Watchkeeper, the recognition that he has as the Minister who did indeed launch a drone strategy as Defence Procurement Minister, that when this is a 14-year-old drone in the hands of the British Army, and the innovation cycle of drones in Ukraine is 2 to 3 months, we can do better. The Army know how they will do better, and they will replace it. In terms of some of the other questions, on helicopters, on the future of structure of our forces and the capabilities we need, these are indeed areas that are being considered by the Strategic Defence Review. And as I said in my statement, we have made, and I have made these decisions today in consultation with the reviewers to make sure these are aligned with their thinking, and we've done so in dialogue with NATO. Madam Deputy Speaker, you mentioned HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark. They were mothballed. There were no plans for either of these ships to go back to sea for nearly 10 years until they were due to be taken out of service. These were not ready to sail. These were not ready to fight. There are capabilities that can be covered elsewhere, and this will save us every year money that we can redeploy within defence to upgrading our forces and our technologies for the future. And I say to the Honourable Gentleman, he saw the figures before the election that I saw afterwards. He knows the truth of the black hole that his government left across the board. But he did nothing in defence to get a grip of the budgets. He did nothing to decommission out-of-date kit. And I'm taking the action now to strengthen defence for the future. These decisions are overdue. The service chiefs support these changes. It means we can move more rapidly, as we must, learning the lessons from Ukraine, recognising the changing nature of warfare and the rising global threats. We have to evolve our equipment. We have to invest to prepare our forces for the future.
I call the Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Singh, Dhesi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome overall the Secretary of State's statement today, because some of the work to reform the operations of the Ministry of Defence is long overdue. It's right that old platforms are being retired and we're transitioning to newer equipment, and I'm also glad to note that it has the full backing of our military chiefs. However, the this is being implemented without the full findings of the Strategic Defence Review being announced. And obviously there are cost implications as well as an impact on our people. So can the Secretary of State advise me about a couple of things? Firstly, will the unrequired kit be either sold to allies or be given to Ukraine? And secondly, in terms of our people, how will they be reskilled and retrained so that there are no job losses?
Madam Deputy Speaker, these are decisions I've taken now, as I said in my statement, that both help us to get a grip of the MOD budget now and to create greater scope to better implement the Strategic Defence Review when it reports. These are decisions that I've said are overdue. They're decisions that were ducked by previous ministers in the previous government. Further decisions about what to do with the decommissioned equipment have not yet been made, but I will make sure that when I make those decisions, I will inform his committee, and I look forward to the grilling that he and his colleagues on the committee are set to give me, no doubt about this and a number of other things tomorrow morning.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Richard Foord.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd like to declare an interest. My nephew is an aircraft engineer with the Royal Air Force, and so I shan't be commenting on the retention payment, much as it sounds very handsome. I welcome the emphasis in the statement today on defence people. And I do think that it was a legacy of the last Conservative government that there wasn't enough emphasis on retaining brilliant people in the armed forces. Possibly we saw with Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, who was fascinated by technology, came to the House and made a statement about Dragonfire, but missed the very important things that were slipping down the list, such as the platforms that we're hearing about that are being decommissioned today. So I welcome the pay rise for personnel, and I particularly welcome the retention payment for Army personnel who've served for more than 4 years, given that the legacy of Capita is an appalling one. However, there are some alarming gaps, Madam Deputy Speaker. The new Chinook heavy lift not coming in till 2027 leaves a 3-year, very substantial gap in 14 Chinook. The new medium helicopter contract is not due to be awarded till next year. I question when that will be introduced, perhaps not until the beginning of the next decade for the new medium helicopter. The multi-role support ships, not due to come into service until 2033. And I'm alarmed at what that might do for the ability of the Royal Marines to operate in the littoral. I question in the statement that it said there was the full backing from our service chiefs. Of course there was. They have to salute, turn to the right and carry on. What was lacking was a statement around this being taken in consultation with the SDR reviewers. Was this statement given their full backing too?
Madam Deputy Speaker, my statement was very clear. I made these decisions in consultation with the Strategic Defence reviewers. It's not for them to back them or not, but I'm sure if the Honourable Gentleman asks them, they would say these are entirely the right decisions, that go in the right direction, that start to make our forces more fit for the future. They are consistent with the direction of our own thinking, which is why I can confidently take them now, because I need to create, and we need to create, the scope to move faster towards the future once the Defence Review reports. But we also need to do more to deal with the dire state of the finances that we inherited in defence and across the government. The Honourable Gentleman asks about Chinook. Well, this acceleration of their retirement will apply to the 14 oldest helicopters in the fleet, of more than 50. Some of those are more than 35 years old. And it means that these oldest 14 will be retired at the point where they are due to enter a costly maintenance package. That will not happen. It means that we can speed up the transition to the new, much more capable Chinooks that will arrive. And it also means that we can save money for defence that we can redeploy to other purposes. And finally, just to say, I very much hope, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can sign up his nephew with this new aircraft engineers incentive payment.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I think those who need to look at what state the last government left the armed forces in should look at the report from the Defence Select Committee, Readiness for War, of which there's a Conservative majority on that. Now, can I just say to the Secretary, I really welcome his statements, particularly around waste and especially on the issue of recruitment and retention of key people in the armed forces. But can I ask him on the issue of defence reform, whether in the few months he's been in the job, whether he feels that the MOD is fit for purpose, is it agile and adaptable enough for the modern threats and the oncoming threats we face?
The short answer to my honourable friend's question is no, which is precisely the reason for the far-reaching reforms that I have begun. This is a process that will continue, I expect, through my entire time in this post. It needs to be relentless, it needs to be far-reaching, it needs to be radical, otherwise we simply will not be able, as a country, to fashion the forces we need in the future to be able to fight, to deter, to defend this country. And I say to my honourable friend, who is one of the leading experts on defence, having served as a Defence Select Committee member in the previous government, I value his view. I refer the opposition front bench to the points he's made, and I congratulate him finally and wish him well as chair and leader of the new UK parliamentary delegation to NATO, and wish all the members from both houses and all sides of the House a successful delegation visit to Montreal later this week.
Sir Iain Duncan Smith.
Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman knows I've known him for a long time, have a high regard for him. So these are words that I simply offer him in my knowledge of all the battles that you undertake within government, always with the Treasury. So I simply ask him this question. Putting to aside 1 second that there is any party difference on this, we all want a functional and ready defensive force able to take on whatever comes at us. And we live in a very unstable world and a dangerous world today, more dangerous than any time I can recall. So I simply ask this question. The government rightly, and I welcome this, set up the Strategic Defence Review to set the key priorities and the key threats. And it seemed to me reasonable, therefore, that we should wait for this report to come, which I believe would strengthen the MOD's arm in future discussions, negotiations and battles with the Treasury, always with the Treasury. So I really pose him this simple question. When you feed to the Treasury little bits and pieces ahead of that review, they will come back for more. Yep. I simply ask this question. Bulwark and Albion still had life in them and could have been resurrected. Mothballing is what the Americans use all the time. Could I please suggest to him he rethinks this process and says to the Treasury, back off now, when the review's there, we can have a proper discussion and a proper debate.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I appreciate the right honourable gentleman's tone. I appreciate his advice. But on the savings that I've outlined that will flow from these 6 decommissioning decisions, that money will be retained in full in defence. It will not go to the Treasury. And he links finances to the Strategic Defence Review. And the Prime Minister has always been clear since the NATO summit in Washington in July. It is Strategic Defence Review first, pathway to 2.5% second, and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury recently confirmed that we should expect that in the spring.
Chris Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend. It is good to hear the Secretary of State finally get to grips with the root and branch reform that we need in the MOD. I want to cast his mind back to our dossier waste that we produced in opposition, which showed since 2010 £13 billion of taxpayers' money was wasted on MOD. Will he commit, as he did in that report, to a root and branch NAO report into MOD waste, and also submitted the MOD to become the very first department for the Office of Value for Money? And also will he commit to continue to update this House in his ongoing battle against MOD waste?
Well, I appreciate my honourable friend's comments and the reminder to this House of the dossier of defence waste that we did indeed together work on in opposition. I can confirm to him and to the House that I have commissioned an internal audit of waste, but I haven't waited until the results of that. I've already reduced the consultancy spend by £300 million this year. It was set to be at a ballooned £1 billion for over 3 years for consultancy and extra staff. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I've also scrapped the Tories' £40 million VIP helicopter contract, something that was money spent on moving VIPs around the country rather than investing in our servicemen and women, which we can now do.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, this is a black day for the Royal Marines, and may I advise the Defence Secretary that he'd do well to have a look at the report Sunset for the Royal Marines, which was published by the Defence Committee in February 2018, when the issue of scrapping our amphibious assault ships was described by the committee across parties as militarily illiterate and totally at variance with strategic reality. Does he accept that the purpose of HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, which were due to remain in service for 9 and 10 more years respectively, is to be able to have the capability of making a landing across a foreshore when it is opposed by enemy forces, just as the Fearless and Intrepid did the job before Albion and Bulwark? And does he agree with me that we have no way of knowing whether the absence of that capability for the next decade won't be an incentive to somebody to try something like the Falklands in the future?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have a huge amount of respect for the Right Honourable Gentleman, and he led the committee that produced an important report. It was 6 years ago, and I just say to him, far from being a black day, as he says, this signals a bright future which will be reinforced by the SDR for the Marines and their elite force. On HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, he is right. Both ships were not due to go out of service for 9 and 10 years respectively. But neither, given the state they're in, the decisions taken previously by the last government, were set to sail again. In other words, they'd in practice been taken out of service, but ministers had not been willing to admit this. Now, our 3 Bay-class landing ships and RFA Argus, for now, will continue to provide, as they do now, the amphibious capability. This will allow us both to save at least £9 million a year that would have been spent under the previous plans, and it allows us to focus much more strongly on the multi-role support ships, which promise to have a greater capability, a broader range of ability for the future.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's focus on the future of our forces, which has been backed by the Chiefs, particularly in relation to the retention payments for our aircraft engineers and army personnel. As others have alluded to in the debate, technology is changing the nature of the threats that we face. So can the Secretary of State confirm that this government will work closely with the defence industry to harness new technologies to ensure that our forces have the kit that they need to respond effectively to increasing threats?
I can indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my honourable friend's comments. The best exemplification of the argument she makes is in the Army's plans for rapidly replacing the Watchkeeper Mark I capability, a 14-year-old drone, in an era now, as Ukraine tells us, where drone technology has a life cycle of 2 to 3 months. The Army know what they can do better, they know they can do it more quickly, they know how they will want to be able to focus their efforts for the future, and decommissioning the Watchkeeper Mark I's will allow them better to do that.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement from the Secretary of State, and I do recognise and appreciate that he's doing a difficult job in a dangerous world. But with regards to the scrapping of HMS Bulwark and Albion, I wonder if I could seek some clarification. we're told that there is a bright future for the Royal Marines, yet at the same time we hear from the government that decisions about defence capabilities will be made in the Strategic Defence Review. So could the Secretary of State tell the House precisely which conversations he has had about the future of the Royal Marines, and specifically what this means from the UK's commitment towards NATO to defend the High North?
Madam Deputy Speaker, this means no change to the available amphibious capability because, in practice, Albion and Bulwark have been mothballed. They're out of action. They hadn't planned to sail again until they were taken out of service a decade in the future. What it allows us to do is to focus more quickly on the more modern, more flexible capabilities that we will need for the future. And I say to the Honourable Gentleman, who I congratulate him on becoming a member of the Defence Select Committee. I'm sure if he's at the committee tomorrow morning, he'll want to pursue this further.
Greg Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think a bit around this debate should be about honest and just being honest, because if a Defence Department wants to step forward and say, we want to modernise, we want to be able to buy kit at scale and at pace, but we have a limited budget, then you have to let some things go. That's just being honest and being realistic. To talk about Bulwark and Albion specifically, and from a Royal Marines background, I first went on Bulwark in, I think, 2017 on a training exercise, learning how to plan and execute raiding operations. And I've got fond memories of the ship, as do many people in the Royal Marines. But that exercise was not conducted at sea. It was conducted with Bulwark alongside in Devonport, where it has remained for a very long time, for a number of years. And even at that time in 2017, we were told, you will not go on this ship at sea. It's not going to happen. So people knew that at the time, Madam Deputy Speaker. But can we be honest and ask, and can I ask the Secretary of State, please, talking about Plymouth and Devonport, where Albion and Bulwark are, and talking also about HMS Westminster, which you mentioned as well, how are the jobs and the workers in Plymouth going to be protected? And we know that we've got coming forward a huge scale of new submarines. Can we talk about the investment required into Plymouth?
Order, Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right that too often decisions were either ducked or they were taken, and too often Parliament wasn't fully informed. And the point he makes about the experience on Bulwark is very telling. You do not have the capability if it's incapable of sailing. You do not have the facility to train effectively on it if all it can do is stay alongside. So quite in practice, as I said earlier, Bulwark and Albion have been taken out of action. It's just that ministers have been unwilling to level with the public and level with Parliament that this is the case. Now, in the case of Plymouth Devonport, I quite understand his interest in this. I've been a strong supporter in opposition and in government of the team transformation Barrow approach. I think there's a case for looking at replicating a similar model in other parts of the country, and for me, first in frame will be Plymouth.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Speaker, so what does this announcement tell us about how the Strategic Defence Review is really going? One of the lessons of the Ukraine war is that old kit can be very useful. And as my right honourable friend for Chingford and Woodford Green says, America's airfields and dockyards are stacked full of old kit for future contingencies. We are throwing away capabilities which are only out of commission because there wasn't enough money, and now he's telling us there's probably even less money. So please will he not come to this House and pretend he's just clearing out an old cupboard of rubbish that everybody had forgotten about, and that the defence chiefs are hopping up and down with delight at his clearing out.
Well, first of all, Madam Deputy Speaker, the right honourable gentleman has really a long interest and great expertise in defence. I've listened to him over the years make the argument that in the UK our alacrity in disposing of any decommissioned kit and equipment was a strategy that ought to be reviewed and rethought and was different to some other countries. And I've made clear to the House today that the decommissioning decisions I've taken have been made, but what we do with the kit that comes out of service have not yet been settled. And finally, just on this question of what does it tell us about the Strategic Defence Review? Well, I think what my decisions and the announcements today can tell the House and the Right Honourable Gentleman. First of all, that people will be at the heart of the plans for the future. Secondly, that the recognition that technology is rapidly changing and at an accelerating pace, and so that imperative will be part of the Strategic Defence Review. And finally, the lesson that Ukraine, that he talks about, also tells us is that you have to have an increasingly integrated force. That's reflected in the decisions I've taken today. He should expect that to be reflected also in the confirmation and recommendations of the Strategic Defence Review.
Gregor Poynton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, another day, another Labour Minister at the dispatch box cleaning up the mess left by the party opposite. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that the decisions outlined in today's statement will fix the foundations of our nation's defence, spend every penny he's got wisely and keep our nation safer?
Yes. Give him a job.
Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend for Livingston is absolutely right. And the other element I would add to it is that when inevitably you want to do more than you can afford, you have to focus the resources you've got at the areas of most importance. And that's the underlying principle that applies to the retention payments I've been able to announce this afternoon for the tri-service aircraft engineers and also for the other ranks and lance corporals in the Army after 4 years' service. We need them. We need them for the future. We've trained them. They've got great skills. We want them to have a longer career and a more productive career within our armed forces.
Dave Dugan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, servicemen and women will have listened with despair to hear the Government and the opposition argue about whether the strategic and catastrophic underfunding of the armed forces was over the last 14 years or the last 30 years. Either way, it results in the situation that we find ourselves in just now in terms of defence of the realm. Given the announcements today by the Secretary of State, can he advise, with one more Type 23 to bite the dust, how many escorts and frigates will be available subject to the PIP programme on Type 45 before 31 and 26 are available? What about the AW149 as a result of new medium-lift helicopter? Why is this government moving at a snail's pace in the same as the last government did on new medium-lift helicopters? And with 31 rotary-wing platforms and 5 Royal Navy and Royal Fleet auxiliary ships coming out of service, what message does this send to the outside world? And what will the Strategic Defence Review do to bolster that situation? And 300 million less getting spent on consultants. Can the Secretary of State advise what will the figure on consultancy spend now be in the MOD?
Madam Deputy Speaker, it will be 300 million less than it would have been before. On the question of the decision on HMS Northumberland, this makes no difference to the availability of the Royal Navy ships at sea, which is the question he asked me, because this is not a ship that was capable, and if it was going to be refitted as planned in its current state, it could have cost hundreds of millions of pounds to do, which is also behind the decision that I've taken today. And then on the question of the medium-lift helicopters, that process is underway and continues.
Jacob Collier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a recent visit to Commando Training Centre Royal Marines with the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, we saw the amazing Gordon Messenger facility that serves Royal Marines, their families and veterans. This is a true hub of the community and was valued by everybody within the service. Can he say more about the support that this government is giving to service personnel, veterans and their families?
Yeah.
Do you know, I think one of the most important things that this House collectively, never mind the government that introduced the bill, has done in the last week is to give its full backing to the second reading of the Armed Forces Commissioner Bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is an independent champion that will improve service life, that will be there for those who serve and the families that support them. And I look forward to my honourable friend's contribution again to those debates, and just say to him, I congratulate him on becoming a member of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme. It is a great scheme, and I know he will have inspiring experiences as well as bring a more informed contribution still to debates in this House.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Deputy Speaker, I do appreciate the constraints on the Defence Secretary, but this statement makes a mockery of the SDR process. It also removes significant lines of contingent capability. Now, he says that these won't be the last difficult decisions that he'll have to make, and he says that he's working in lockstep with the SDR. So is he and is it rolling the pitch for the removal of the carriers or their mothballing, as has been rumoured, and does he understand what that means for the future of the Royal Navy as a blue water navy globally deployable? And given his comments on Albion and Bulwark, is he also rolling the pitch for the future of the Royal Marines, since the two are intertwined and will be for the next 10 years before a replacement can be provided?
Madam Deputy Speaker, Bulwark and Albion are not capabilities available to the Marines at the present. And in terms of the future of the Marines, I've said 3 times in the House, I think, this afternoon, the future of their elite force as part of the complex of what we need for the future will get reinforced in the SDR. That's what I expect. The decisions I've announced today are consistent with the SDR. He wrongly suggests that somehow these announcements make a mockery of it. They're entirely consistent. They're taken in consultation with the reviewers. And in terms of the future of carriers, one of the things that I and my honourable friend, the Minister for the Armed Forces, has been given particular attention to in recent weeks are the plans for one of those very carriers to undertake the Carrier Strike 2025 voyage into the Indo-Pacific, where it will have full validation exercises with some really important allies, and is a vital part of our ability to reinforce both our hard power and our soft power in future.
Graham Downey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Secretary of State for his statement. I think what's very clear, both from the statement itself and some of the follow-up questions, is that the previous government has wasted millions of pounds in defence spending that could have been spent better, making clear Labour is the party of defence. That is also money, Madam Deputy Speaker, that could have been spent better in our economy, making sure that we are supporting the economies and the defence sector across the UK. Can I ask the Secretary of State what steps he will take to ensure that future programmes will be spent in the UK, and in particular what guarantees he can offer that we will support shipbuilding across this country?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm proud of our tradition of UK shipbuilding, including in Scotland. And when it comes to building Britain's warships, I want to see them built in Britain. And my honourable friend may be aware that the commitment that we have given is to make part of the government's industrial strategy with the defence sector as one of those priority sectors, so that we not only strengthen our forces for the future, but we use defence to strengthen our economy for the future, create fresh jobs, as well as back the innovative companies that will have so much bigger part to play both in our security and in our prosperity.
Sir Desmond Swain.
The Secretary of State presented the savings as no-brainers. The ships were damaged or obsolete. But in his closing remarks, he told us that these would not be the last difficult decisions. He simply cannot have it both ways. It's all about the messaging in the end. And what's the message that will be received from this statement in Buenos Aires, in Moscow, in Peking and in Tehran?
Yeah.
And Washington, quite right.
The message is clear. We now have a government that is willing to take the decisions to deal with outdated equipment that should have been retired long ago, so that we can switch our focus, we can switch our finances, and we can develop the capabilities, we can develop the technologies, we can develop the weaponry that our forces need to be able to fight more effectively in the future.
Kevin Bonavia.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome today's statement from the Secretary of State. It's rather galling to hear from members opposite about cuts when the biggest cut we've had in the last government was the size of our armed forces to the smallest size since the end of the Napoleonic Wars. In that vein, I very much welcome the increase to the salaries of our armed forces, the highest in 20 years, and particularly the retention payments to aircraft engineers and serving armed personnel. What message can my right honourable friend give to those who are in our armed forces and those who are thinking of a career in armed forces that they will have a better future if they serve?
The message is our UK armed forces offer a fantastic career, a wide range of opportunity and skills that will set any young person wanting to sign up. It will set them up for life. It will give them experiences for life. And my honourable friend is totally right when he talks about Conservative cuts. If you look at this as our first year of a Labour government, we're increasing defence spending by nearly £3 billion. The first year of the last Conservative government in 2010, they cut defence by £2 billion.
Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And if I can echo the words of my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford and Wood Green, and now the Secretary of State's Treasury Minder has left the chamber, he will be able to speak more openly about some of the challenges that you face in terms of dealing with the Treasury. I do appreciate that the Secretary of State faces really difficult decisions, and I know that all the decisions in this will have been incredibly hard to make. But could he just confirm to the House that the Chinooks and the Pumas will be at least offered to the Ukrainians to see if they can be used by the Ukrainians in any way at all as a first option?
Madam Deputy Speaker, given the right honourable gentleman's experience in the very job that I've got, I will take that as an early representation in the future decisions I'll have to take on what to do with the kit once it's decommissioned.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has rightly said the Ministry of Defence needs reform. And will he commit that one of the major failures has been the procurement of equipment, which has led to the wasting of hundreds, if not billions of pounds of taxpayers' cash? And will he also commit to reform the recruitment of new personnel into the armed forces? Because nobody has a good word to say about the outsourcing contract to Capita. Bring it in-house. Will he commit to that?
Well, the honourable gentleman is right. Procurement, one of the first focuses and most important areas for further reform in defence, but defence reform is required across the board. And on recruitment, I hope he'll welcome the steps that I've already taken, removing almost 100 detailed bits of red tape that prevent young people from being able to be recruited. I hope he'll welcome also the tough targets for rapid turnaround and recruitment and an offer of a training place that will come in. And I hope he'll welcome also the direct recruitment route now to those who need and want to join our cyber forces as part of reinforcing our national security for the future.
Anna Gelrod.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With close social and economic ties between communities on both sides of the Tamar, a Devonport deal is very important to people in South East Cornwall and in Plymouth. Will the Secretary of State commit to scoping a Devonport deal that looks to the future?
Madam Deputy Speaker, if my honourable friend with her South West posse wants to come to see me to discuss this, I'd be very happy to try and arrange that soon.
Tim Rocker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister of State in another place earlier today talked about the world becoming darker and darker. Can the Secretary of State assure us, after the difficult decisions he's had to take today, that the SDR will be robust and that the Defence Equipment Plan will reflect the future threats and the future capabilities that the armed forces will require?
My honourable friend puts his finger exactly on the button. At the heart of the Strategic Defence Review is an assessment of the increasing and diversifying threats we face, the rapidly changing technology and nature of warfare, and therefore the capabilities that we require for the future and the sort of forces that we require for the future. Those are at the heart of the work that the reviewers are doing at the moment. They're doing that in a thorough way, they're doing it at pace, and I expect them to conclude early in the new year.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst it's deeply disappointing to hear the decisions around Devonport's surface fleet today, particularly as the MP for a proud home to the Royal Marines and Foord Commando, it does provide, as has been alluded to by some of the colleagues on the other side of the House, an opportunity to raise the need for a Devonport deal again, and particularly Plymouth and Devonport's role in refitting the Royal Navy submarines going forward. Now, you've already offered a meeting, which is great, as a member of that Southwest Posse. However, what we're specifically looking for is cross-party, cross-ministerial commitment. We're getting plenty of meetings. We just want to know that the ministers are joined up, that they're having the conversations cross-departmentally, and that that Devonport deal might be able to offer Plymouth and the wider Southwest a future as we see these armed forces changes.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I regard defence as largely beyond party politics, so I'm happy to extend that invitation to a meeting to her on a cross-party basis. What I can't undertake to do is promise to deliver a cross-ministerial meeting, but if she's happy to start with me, then that's what we can do.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As one of a number of Royal Marines on this side of the House, I would really like to welcome the Secretary of State's commitment to the Royal Marines in the SDR coming up. Much like the member for Plymouth Moorview, I too served on HMS Albion, but that was 15 years ago, and I think we can all recognise that the battlefield has changed, and it's important that we have the financing available to invest in the technology of the future. On the subject of reform, I noticed that there's only 2 out of 49 major defence programmes on time and on budget in the MOD at the moment. So can the Secretary of State tell the House more about the steps he is taking on defence reform to ensure the failures we saw under the last government can never be repeated?
Now, indeed, my honourable friend refers to the regular reporting of the Major Projects Authority, the fact that only 2 out of 49 major defence projects can be said to be on time and on budget. This is not a department that is delivering effectively for the taxpayer or for our forces. That's why defence reform, far-reaching and deep, is required.
Mark Seward.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to welcome my right honourable friend's statement today. It's really good to have a Secretary of State that is taking the long-term decisions to make sure that our military is fit for the future. I particularly welcome the fact that all personnel affected by the decisions today will be retrained or redeployed. Now, in his first month in the job, the Prime Minister stated at the NATO summit that we were firmly committed to increasing defence spending to that 2.5% target. Given that it's the final question today, will he take this opportunity now to restate that commitment, but also our commitment to ensure that our armed forces, that we take the long-term decisions so that our armed forces are equipped to make sure that our country is strong at home and secure abroad?
Can I say to my honourable friend, he doesn't just ask about the detail of the statement, but he cuts right to the chase of the purpose of the announcements I've made today. And I reinforce the point that he made. The purpose of this is that we can make Britain better defended, we can make Britain more secure at home and strong abroad, and that's exactly what this government is determined to do.
That's the end.